I want to start by saying something that most people in the Corps don't like to admit out loud. There are days when you stop feeling it. You work a border relief station long enough, you process enough faces, enough forms, enough hollow eyes looking at you through scratched plexiglass, and somewhere around month 7 or 8, your nervous system just negotiates a deal with your brain. It says, look, we can keep doing this, but we're going to have to stop feeling every single one. And your brain agrees because the alternative is not being able to get out of bed. I'm not proud of that, I'm just being honest. I had been at Tharos for 11 months when it happened. 11 months of the kind of work that the United Earth Tourism Board doesn't put in their brochures. The kind of work where you're filling out intake forms at 2 in the morning because a transport hauler showed up 6 hours late with 93 displaced persons on board, half of them dehydrated, a quarter of them sick, and all of them scared in ways that no translator module could fully capture. Tharos Station sits at the edge of the Calvary Corridor. If you've never heard of it, that's by design. The Galactic Transit Authority doesn't advertise its border zones. They prefer the public to think of GTA checkpoints as clean, efficient, orderly places where species of all kinds move smoothly between sectors. And some of them are. The central hubs at Meridian Gate and Juno Cross are genuinely impressive. Gleaming, multilingual announcements, decent food vendors. Tharos is not that. Tharos is what happens at the edges. It's a converted mining platform, 3 levels of corrugated atmospheric paneling bolted onto an old ore processing scaffold that was supposed to be decommissioned in 2267. They never got around to decommissioning it because they needed the space. They always need the space. The Calvary Corridor runs along the boundary between 2 former conflict zones, the outer reach territories that were devastated in the Surin campaign, and the inner GTA sectors that the big species councils control. Beings filter through the corridor constantly. Some are traders, some are travelers, some are diplomats in polished ships with GTA clearance codes preloaded, and some are families with nothing. The Calvary Corridor had been semi-stable for about 4 years by the time I got there. Semi-stable is a diplomatic word. What it means, in practical terms, is that the active shelling had stopped, the treaty had been signed, and the various military forces had pulled back to their designated zones. What it doesn't mean is that the damage was repaired, or that the people who had been displaced during the Surin campaign had somewhere to go back to, or that the supply chains that used to feed the outer settlements were running again. Semi-stable means the dying got quieter, that's all. I came to Tharos through the United Earth Relief Corps, which is one of those organizations that sounds grand in the mission statement and looks considerably less grand when you're actually doing it. Earth had been a GTA member for 42 years by then. We were still the youngest major member species on the council, still the ones that the older civilizations regarded with a mixture of cautious optimism and thinly veiled condescension. Humans were energetic, the Zurich Directorate had once noted in an official communiqué, but emotionally erratic and procedurally unsophisticated. What that actually meant, translated from diplomatic language, was that humans kept doing things that the other species considered strange, like volunteering, like showing up at border stations with medical supplies and food synthesizers when there was no strategic or economic reason to do so, like caring, loudly and inefficiently, about beings who had no political value to us. The Relief Corps had been running Tharos's humanitarian annex for 6 years. Before that, there was no humanitarian annex. There was just the processing queue and the border guards and the long, grinding wait for clearance that sometimes lasted weeks, during which displaced persons camped in the holding corridors on whatever they'd brought with them. We had changed some of that, not enough, but some. My unit was small, 8 people, rotating shifts, covering intake, medical triage, supply distribution, and translation assistance. We worked alongside the GTA Border Administration, which meant we worked around the GTA Border Administration, because the administration was chronically understaffed, procedurally rigid, and not particularly interested in humanitarian concerns. Their job was to check documents and enforce the corridor transit code. Our job was to make sure that the people waiting for their documents to be checked didn't starve or die in the meantime. It sounds simple. It is not simple. The day it happened, Standard Cycle 2291.114, started like most days at Tharos started, which is to say, it started badly. We'd had a cold snap come through the upper corridor levels. Tharos's atmospheric regulation was jury-rigged at the best of times, and the heating units on level 2, where most of the long-term holding area was, had been running at 60% capacity for 9 days. I'd filed the maintenance request. Then I filed it again. Then I called the GTA station infrastructure desk, which transferred me to the GTA platform maintenance queue, which informed me that a technician would be dispatched within 7 to 14 standard working days. In the meantime, 60%. I'd requisitioned extra thermal blankets from our supply depot on level 3. We had about 200 of them. There were roughly 460 beings in the long-term holding corridor that week. You do the math. The corridor itself was about what you'd expect from a repurposed mining platform. Long, low-ceilinged in sections, then suddenly high-ceilinged where the old ore lift shafts had been converted into vertical common spaces. The floor was a mix of original grading and polymer panels that various renovation cycles had laid down over the years, not all of them level. The lighting was standard GTA fluorescent, that particular blue-white tone that makes everyone look slightly unwell regardless of their baseline complexion. There were benches along the walls, bolted-down steel ones, and in the wider sections people had set up informal camps with whatever they'd brought: fabric panels, folded cargo blankets, personal containers stacked to make windbreaks. It smelled like a transit corridor that had been holding too many living creatures for too long. Recycled air, body heat, the faint chemical tang of the atmospheric processors struggling to keep up, and underneath it all something organic and complicated that the ventilation never quite cleared. I had learned to stop noticing the smell around month 3. I was on early shift that day, which meant I'd started at what the station clock called 600, early enough that level 2 was still in its version of quiet. A lot of the families were still sleeping, or trying to. The children were the ones who were always up first, or who'd never fully slept. You'd see them in the corridors before anyone else, sitting up inside their families' camp spaces, watching the lights with that particular quality of attention that children have when they're bored and understimulated, and a little bit frightened. I was carrying a supply crate, thermal packs, some nutrition blocks, a first aid kit for the Velhari family on the far end of the corridor who had a member with a dermal reaction to the synthetic bedding. When I first saw them, I almost walked right past. That's the honest truth. I almost walked past, and I think about that sometimes, late at night when the station's quiet and there's nothing to do but look at the ceiling and think about the choices that turn on nothing. They were sitting against the wall in Section 7C, which was one of the narrower parts of the corridor, between two of the old ore shaft pillars. Not a great spot. There was a draft there from a gap in the atmospheric paneling that maintenance had patched twice and would need to patch again. But they were there because by the time they'd arrived, all the better spots were taken. There were 2 of them. The older one, and I use older loosely, because I didn't know their species well enough at first glance to accurately judge age, was sitting with her back against the pillar, very straight, very still. She was watching the corridor with the kind of watchfulness that isn't paranoia. The watchfulness of someone who has learned, through direct experience, that not paying attention costs you. Her eyes were the first thing I really registered. Large, with a golden amber iris that had a slight bioluminescent quality, not glowing exactly, but catching the light in a way that human eyes don't. Her skin, or what I could see of it, was a deep charcoal gray with a faint iridescent sheen, like the surface of something that had been polished and then exposed to weather. Her features were angular. Her ears were positioned slightly higher on her head than human ears, and were elongated, folded partway back against her skull, in a posture that I later learned indicated stress. She was wearing clothes that had once been decent, and were now telling the story of a long journey. A long, hard journey. The fabric was something that looked woven but had an unusual structural quality. It probably had thermal properties built in, which explained why she'd layered it over the younger one despite the fact that she herself would be cold. The younger one was asleep. Or trying to be. You could tell the difference. She was curled against the older one's side, tucked under the layered fabric, and she was small visibly, significantly smaller than the older one, with the particular compactness of a young child. Her coloring was similar but lighter. The gray of her skin was more silvered, and the bioluminescent quality in her features was more pronounced, giving her a faint glow that pulsed very gently when she breathed. She had her hands tucked under her chin. One of her fingers had a small abrasion on it, wrapped with a strip of the same fabric as their clothes. Someone had done that carefully. Someone had torn a strip from their own clothing to bandage a child's finger. I stopped. The older one noticed immediately. Those amber eyes came to me without her head moving, just the eyes, and there was a calculation in them. Fast, precise. The kind of calculation that beings do when they've spent time in environments where being looked at by a stranger is something you need to assess quickly. I held up my free hand, open palm. It's a gesture that doesn't translate perfectly across all species, but in the context of a humanitarian corridor with me wearing the Relief Corps blue vest, it tends to read correctly. I'm not a threat. I see you. I'm not walking away. She looked at the vest, then back at my face. I crouched down, to bring myself to her eye level rather than standing over her. Hey, I said, I'm with the Relief Corps, Human Section UEHA. I tapped the badge on my vest. Do you have a translator module, or do you need one from us? She was quiet for a moment. Then she said something. It was in a language I didn't recognize, not one of the 40-odd species tongues that my personal translator covered, and it came out quiet, almost careful, like she was choosing not to let her voice carry. My translator module buzzed at me, language not in database, seeking approximate match. That wasn't unusual at Tharos. We got a lot of people whose languages weren't in the standard module. The Calvari corridor ran through enough remote sectors that you'd sometimes get species who'd been entirely off the GTA grid. People from settlements that had developed in isolation and had never been fully cataloged linguistically. I reached into the side pocket of my supply crate and pulled out one of our loaner modules, a broader spectrum unit that the Corps had developed specifically for border work, with a wider language net and a better approximation engine for unknowns. I held it out to her. She looked at it, then at me. I set it on the floor between us and slid it gently toward her, then sat back. She reached out and picked it up, examined it briefly. Then she touched something on the surface, the activation point, which she'd found faster than most humans would have, and said something again. This time my module caught it. Partial match, 63% confidence, which meant the translation was going to be rough, but the meaning would be close. You work here, it rendered, not quite a question. Yes, I said, 11 months. A pause while my words went through the module she was holding. Then you know how long the processing takes. I do, I said. Have you been through intake yet? 3 days ago. They took our documents for verification. They said 5 to 7 standard cycles. 3 days, standard GTA processing cycle. That meant they'd been in the holding corridor for at least 3 days, probably longer if they'd arrived before they filed intake. Are you eating? I asked. Did you find the supply distribution point, Level 2, Section 4A, there's a nutrition station. Something moved. The younger one. She stirred under the layered fabric and her eyes opened large, like the older one's, amber gold, but hazed with that particular look of a child who's been deeply asleep and isn't quite sure where she is yet. She looked up at her older companion, said something soft. The older one's posture changed. Barely. A slight shift in the set of her shoulders, not quite a flinch, more like a brace. The younger one looked at me. Then she looked at the supply crate on the floor beside me. And she looked at it with an expression that I want to be very specific about, because I've seen a lot of things in 11 months at Tharos, and I want to be precise. It wasn't greed. It wasn't even straightforward hunger, though it was that too. It was the expression of a child who has already learned that wanting something visible and nearby does not mean she'll get it. Who has learned, somewhere in her short life, to look at food that isn't hers and keep the wanting very quiet, because making it loud gets you nothing except disappointed. She looked at the crate for exactly 2 seconds, then she looked away. 2 seconds. That was what stopped the machinery. That was the thing that cut through 11 months of negotiated distance and found whatever was underneath it. I opened the crate. Not the nutrition blocks I'd been carrying for the Velhari family. Those were spoken for, and I wasn't going to take from one family to give to another. But I had emergency rations in the lower tray. Standard Relief Corps field rations, designed for cross-species compatibility, high caloric density, medically safe for most known biology types with a small caveat list. I'd been carrying 6 of them as part of the standard kit I always took on corridor rounds. I took out 2 and looked at the older one. "Can she eat these?" I asked. I have to ask because there are a few biology types that don't process the compound base well. What is in them? Not a question, a request for specific information, which was smart, exactly the right thing to ask. I read her the ingredients list. My translator handled most of it. She listened with the focused quality of someone who understood what she was listening for. Then she said, "She can eat them. We both can. Is there a cost?" "No," I said, "no cost." Another pause. "There is always a cost." "Not here," I said, "not from us. That's," I searched for how to explain it in terms that would translate cleanly, "that's the whole point of why we're here." She looked at me for a long moment, the amber eyes catching the blue-white light of the corridor, the folded back ears, the posture that was still careful, still measured, still not quite trusting. Then she reached out and took the 2 ration packs. She opened one and handed it to the child. The younger one took it with both hands, and before she ate, she looked at the older one, as if checking whether it was real, whether it was allowed. The older one nodded very slightly. The child ate. I don't know how to describe that in a way that doesn't sound sentimental, so I'll just say it plainly. She ate like she was hungry, like she had been hungry for a while. And she ate quietly, without making a production of it, with a kind of dignity that children in dire circumstances sometimes have, a dignity that adults put there by example, because they've decided that even when everything is bad, they're going to do this with their heads up. The older one ate too, but slowly, watching the child while she ate. I sat there. I didn't get up to continue my rounds immediately. I stayed, because something told me that standing up and walking away at that moment would be the wrong thing. After a while, the older one looked at me. "My sister," the translator offered. "Her name is Sae, my name is Verith." "Marcus," I said, "Marcus Vale." "Marcus Vale, you are human." "Yeah." We have not encountered humans before. Our sector was outside the primary GTA routes. "That's not unusual for the corridor," I said. "We get a lot of people from sectors that weren't on the main networks. Where are you from, if you don't mind?" A pause, not hesitation exactly, more like the assembling of something. "The Delhari settlements, outer reach 3rd belt." I knew the 3rd belt, at least on paper. It had been heavily impacted by the Surin campaign, not direct conflict mostly, but supply blockade and infrastructure collapse in the wake of the front lines moving through the adjacent sector. The kind of damage that doesn't make the historical records as prominently as the battles do, but leaves just as much behind. "How long did it take you to get here?" I asked. 61 standard cycles. 61 days. For a child I was recalibrating my initial estimate, based on the size and the way she moved, maybe 6 or 7 in whatever the equivalent of human years was for their species. I kept my face neutral. I've learned to keep my face neutral in the corridor because reactions, even sympathetic ones, can feel like pity, and pity is a different thing from respect. "Is it just the two of you?" I asked. Verith was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said, "it is just the two of us." The way she said it, even through the translation module's approximation, had a weight to it that I didn't push on. "Okay," I said. "I'm going to finish my morning rounds and then I'm coming back. I want to walk you through the resources we have available. There's more than just food, there's medical, legal assistance, the long-term housing queue. Will you be here?" "We have nowhere else to be." I did finish my rounds. I dropped the supplies with the Velhari family. I checked on 2 other families who had sick members. I filed the updated status reports on my handheld and submitted the heating maintenance request for the 4th time, this time with a note that I was escalating to the GTA station commander's office, which probably wouldn't move things faster but might at least make someone mildly uncomfortable. And the whole time I was thinking about what Verith had said. 61 standard cycles, it is just the two of us. I'd been in the Corps long enough to know how to read the gaps in what people told you. The Third Belt settlements had been communities, family units, extended networks, agricultural cooperatives. People there didn't travel alone. They especially didn't travel with just one child. 61 days, from the Third Belt to Tharos. 2 of them. Yes, it is just the 2 of us. I was back at Section 7C within the hour. I brought more supplies, not just rations but a proper care package, a thermal blanket, a hygiene kit, a child's comfort pack that the Corps had developed specifically for young displaced persons, with small sensory items and a simple game that worked without language. I also brought our junior medical officer, a woman named Pham Thai Thur, who ran our Level 2 medical station. Thur had been at Tharos longer than me. She'd seen more. She had a quality of stillness about her that beings in distress responded well to, not coldness, just calm. The kind of calm that's load-bearing. Verith watched us approach. She'd moved slightly, put herself between the approach path and SAE, who was still awake now but tucked close. "This is Thur," I said, gesturing. "She's our medical officer. I just want to make sure SAE is okay. And you, just a quick check, no pressure." Verith looked at Thur, then back at me. "You came back," she said. I said I would. The amber eyes held on mine for a moment. Then she moved aside. Thur ran the assessment gently. She was good at that, making the equipment feel like nothing, keeping her voice at a consistent register that the translation module could relay without startling inflection. SAE was cautious at first, watching Thur's hands, but she had the adaptability of children, and within a few minutes was examining Thur's diagnostic scanner with the focused curiosity of someone who wanted to understand how it worked. The assessment told us a few things that we'd suspected, and confirmed the ones that were urgent. SAE was malnourished. Not critically. Whatever Verith had been doing for 61 days had kept the worst from happening, but measurably, in the ways that a core medical scanner translated into numbers and flags. Growth cycle disruption, some micronutrient deficits, a respiratory upper range issue that was probably a function of different atmospheric chemistry in the corridor versus what she was adapted for. Verith was worse, though she hadn't mentioned it. The scan showed the kind of depletion that happens when you spend 61 days making sure someone else gets the food and you manage on what's left. Her bone density indicators were flagging. There was evidence of a healed rib fracture, about 3 weeks old by the scan's estimate, that had been wrapped but not properly set. She had broken a rib somewhere on the journey, kept going. Thur gave me a look across Verith's shoulder. I gave it back. We'd seen this before, the caretaker who runs themselves to the ground to keep the dependent alive. It was almost universal, across species, across cultures. The shape of it was always the same. "I'd like you to come to the medical station," Thur said, addressing Verith. "Both of you. We have nutritional supplements that will help SAE recover faster, and I want to check that rib properly and get it supported correctly. It'll take a few hours." "We cannot lose our place in the processing queue," Verith said. "Medical appointments at the GTA clinic remove you from the active status list for the day." I knew this rule. I hated this rule. It was one of those GTA administrative policies that was built around a completely different set of concerns than the ones we dealt with on Level 2. Active status was the queue system for document processing. If you were flagged as unavailable during your processing window, you dropped to the back of the daily list. "Our medical station isn't the GTA clinic," I said. "You're in the relief core system, not theirs. Your processing status won't be affected." She looked at me, not with distrust exactly anymore, with the caution of someone who has been given assurances before that turned out to be wrong. "I know it sounds like I'm just saying that," I said. "But I can show you the confirmation in the system. There's a two-system separation specifically because of this issue. It was actually a fight we had to have with the GTA administration about 3 years ago, and we won it. It's in the Corridor Transit Code, Amendment 7. I pulled up my handheld and showed her the relevant provision. She read it carefully, or the translation module rendered it, and she read that carefully, which took a minute or two. Then she looked at SAE. "We'll come," she said. The medical station on Level 2 wasn't large, but Thur and her colleague Adami had made it functional. Proper lighting, not the blue-white fluorescent of the corridors, but something warmer that the Corps had installed, because the blue-white made medical assessment harder, and also just made people feel worse. A few treatment spaces separated by portable partitions. A well-stocked supply cabinet that we fought the procurement department for every cycle. SAE sat on a treatment bed and watched the station with bright, curious eyes, her earlier wariness replaced for now by the interest of a child in a new environment. She asked questions. They came through the translation module in fragments, partial match approximations, but the gist was clear. "What does that do? Why is that color? Is that for hurting or for helping?" "For helping," Thur told her each time. "This one's for helping. This one's for helping. This one is very specifically for helping." By the third answer, SAE was smiling. It was the first time I'd seen her smile, and I want to note it here because small things matter in the record of events, and a child's first smile in a place like Tharo's is not a small thing. While Thur worked on SAE, I sat with Verith. "I want to help with your case," I told her. "Not just the medical, I mean the processing. I have a case coordinator role. I can review your file, make sure everything's in order, flag it for priority review if there are grounds." "Grounds," she repeated. The translation gave it a slightly questioning tone. "Priority review status is available for cases involving unaccompanied minors, medical need, or evidence of particular vulnerability," I said. "Based on what Thur found, sees nutritional status, your rib, there's a medical need argument. And depending on what your documentation shows about your situation in the third belt, there may be grounds for the vulnerability flag as well." "And if there are grounds, what does that mean?" "It means your processing window moves up. Instead of the standard 5 to 7 cycles, potentially 2 to 3. And it means your case gets reviewed by a senior documentation officer rather than the standard Q processor, someone with more discretion to address complications. She was quiet. "Is there documentation that explains your situation?" I asked. "Why you left the third belt? What happened there?" A long pause. "There is some," she said. "Not much, we had to leave quickly." "Anything helps," I said. "Physical records, data files, even testimony. We have a testimony intake process where we record your account, and it becomes part of your case file." She looked at SAE, who was now engaged in a solemn conversation with Thur about the diagnostic scanner. "I will tell you," Verith said, "but not in front of her." "Of course," I said. "Whenever you're ready, you can come to the coordination office, just the two of us, or if you'd rather have Thur there." "You," she said, "just you. You came back when you said you would." "That is, it means something where I come from." I nodded. "Then just me," I said, "whenever you're ready." She was ready that afternoon. She asked Thur to stay with SAE. SAE was in the middle of a nutritional supplement infusion that Thur had set up, a slow drip that would help correct some of the acute deficits, and she was also, by that point, deeply asleep, which Thur said was exactly right. The body knew what it needed. Verith came with me to the coordination office, which was a small room off the level 2 corridor, barely large enough for 2 chairs and a desk, but it had a door that closed, and that was what mattered. I opened a case file and set the recorder running. I explained the purpose, that her account would become part of the permanent file, that it could support her case, and that it was protected under the UEHA testimony protocol. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, very still, and she told me. Part 2, what Verith told me. She told me about the Delhari settlements, the way you tell someone about a place that no longer exists in the way you knew it. "Our people," she said, "have been in the third belt for 11 generations. We are not a large species. You would not have heard of us. We were not on the GTA trade routes, not until about 40 years ago when a Zurich survey ship found our outer settlements and registered us in the species catalog. Before that, we managed ourselves. We had our own systems. Not advanced by galactic standards, we knew that once we made contact, but functional, stable. We had not had a war in 300 years. The Surin campaign did not come to us directly. The front lines were in the second belt 2 sectors away, but the infrastructure that kept our settlements functioning passed through the second belt. Food imports, medical equipment, the synthesizer components we didn't produce locally. When the campaign disrupted those transit corridors, we felt it within 6 months. Within a year, the shortages were serious. My parents were settlement administrators. They spent the first 2 years of the crisis managing the rationing systems, negotiating with GTA emergency services, trying to get our case in front of someone who had the authority to help. The GTA has emergency assistance protocols. I don't need to tell you this, you work within their system, but the protocols were designed for larger population centers. Our settlements were too small to trigger the automatic thresholds. We fell below the response criteria. My sister was born at the beginning of the 3rd year of the crisis. My parents named her SAE, which in our language means something like, the module may not render this exactly, it means something between light and the thing that comes after. The thing that comes after the dark. I was 15, old enough in our culture to take on responsibility. So I did. I helped with the rationing. I helped with the younger children in our settlement. I learned everything my parents were doing because my parents were exhausted and needed someone to hand things to. The crisis continued into the 4th year. A disease moved through our settlement. I don't know what to call it in GTA terminology. Our medical records from that period were lost, but it was respiratory and it moved fast, and our medical supplies were not adequate. My parents both died in the 4th year. My mother first, my father 12 days later. I was 18. SAE was 3. I became her guardian. That is the only way I know how to say it. She was 3 and I was 18, and our settlement was collapsing around us. Not all at once, gradually, the way things collapse when you don't have enough of anything. People leaving, resources running lower. The administrative structure my parents had built falling apart because there was no one with the experience to maintain it. I stayed for 3 more years. I tried to keep the settlement functional. I helped organize 3 separate supply convoys, once with a Zurich trader who was willing to negotiate, twice by pooling resources with 2 other third belt settlements in similar situations. I filed GTA emergency assistance requests 6 times. Each time, I was informed that our population count did not meet the threshold for emergency activation. In the 6th year of the crisis, a faction of the Surin military forces that had not demobilized after the ceasefire began moving through the Third Belt. They were not fighting. The war was officially over. The translation may not capture this exactly, they were taking resources, equipment, anything that had value. They had authorization or something that looked like authorization from what remained of their command structure, a kind of institutional looting. They came to our settlement. That's where I got the rib. I'm not going to tell you everything about that. I'll just say that I got SAE out. I had a plan. I always had a plan, because by that point I had learned that having a plan was the only thing that kept you from simply freezing when the bad thing arrived. I had documents for both of us, packed in a case that I kept ready. I had a contact, a freight operator, a Velhari, who owed me a favor from the convoy arrangement 3 years earlier. I called in the favor. We left with what we could carry, which was not much, but we left. 61 days, various transports, one of them broke down in the open corridor. We spent 11 days on a platform that was really just a docking node with no facilities while we waited for a connection. I had enough rations for the first 30 days if we were careful. After that I found ways. She never went hungry enough for it to be critical. I made sure of that. Some days I found traders willing to trade, other days I found there are people in the corridor who help. Small people, not organizations. Individuals who would give a child something to eat if you asked the right way. I learned to ask. When we got to Tharos, I thought the worst was behind us. We had the documents. We had the intake forms. We just needed to wait. What I didn't know, what I hadn't calculated, was that the GTA processing queue at Tharos was backed up 3 times its standard length because of a documentation system upgrade that had apparently gone wrong 6 weeks earlier. So the 5 to 7 cycles I'd been told was actually, for most cases, closer to 12 to 15. And by that point, I was running out of what I had left. I had food for maybe 2 more days. I didn't know where the relief corps station was. No one had directed us there at intake. The GTA intake officer had given us our queue number and told us to proceed to level 2 holding. That was all. I would have found it eventually. I was going to start asking today, but you found us first. She stopped. I had been writing, taking notes on my handheld, building the case record, but at some point in the account I had stopped writing and was just listening. I kept my face neutral. I kept my breathing even. Then I said, "Thank you for telling me all of that. It matters. It's all going in the file, every part of it." "Will it help us?" "Yes," I said. "I'm going to be honest with you. I can't make any guarantees about the ultimate outcome of your case, because that's above my pay grade, as we say. But based on what you've just told me, you have grounds for priority review, you have grounds for medical uplift, and you have evidence of persecution by a recognized conflict force in the Surin campaign context, which puts you in a different documentation category that has better protection provisions. I'm going to put together a package tonight and submit it first thing tomorrow morning." "First thing?" "First thing," I said. "I'll also get you an SAE registered for ongoing supply distribution, Not just emergency rations, but the full program. 3 meals a day equivalent, nutritional supplements, clothing allowance if you need it. And I want to talk to our legal advisor. We have a volunteer attorney who comes in twice a week. She knows the GTA corridor transit code well and can look at your documents and make sure everything's in the best possible shape. Verith was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that the translation module took a few seconds to render, and when it did, the approximation was incomplete, just a phrase fragment, but it was enough. In our language, when someone does what you are doing. She stopped, started again. We have no word for thank you that is adequate for this. We have a word for debt that is gladly owed, for obligation that is an honor, for I don't know if the module can give you the exact. You don't have to translate it, I said. I think I understand what you mean. She looked at me with those amber eyes that caught the light in their particular way. I believe you do, she said. Part 3, the bureaucracy FIGHTS back. I want to tell you what the next 4 days looked like, because I think it's important to be honest about the fact that doing the right thing and the machinery agreeing with you are not always the same process. I submitted the priority review package the next morning. It was thorough. I'd worked on it until past midnight, pulling together Verith's testimony, Thur's medical assessment with its documented flags, the evidence of the third belt conflict situation, the legal provisions that applied, the documentation Verith had brought with her. I cross-referenced everything against the GTA Corridor Transit Code, the UEHA intervention protocols, and the Surin campaign displacement provisions, which were a set of special protections that had been negotiated specifically to address situations like this one. The package was good. I was confident in it. The GTA Documentation Office sent back an automated response within 2 hours. Priority review request received. Processing time, 10-14 standard cycles. Please note that submission of a priority review request does not alter the existing queue position of the case in question. Claimant should continue to maintain active status in the standard queue. 10 to 14 cycles. I stared at that for approximately 30 seconds. Then I got up from my desk, walked around the small coordination office 3 times, and sat back down. This was not the first time I had run into this wall. The GTA Documentation Office's response to priority requests was, itself, subject to a processing queue. There was something almost philosophically impressive about the circularity of it. You filed a priority request because the standard process was too slow. The priority request then went through its own slow process. And while that happened, the standard process continued not being fast enough. I forwarded the automated response to our senior core coordinator, a man named Rafik who had been doing this longer than any of us, and had the peculiar serenity of someone who has lost all capacity for bureaucratic surprise. His response was, yes, I know. Try the Surin provisions direct channel, it bypasses the documentation queue. Form UEHA 7C, not the standard priority form. Don't let them route you back to the standard channel. I had not known about the direct channel. Rafik had not mentioned it until now because, as he explained when I asked, it only works about 40% of the time and it requires a senior coordinator co-signature, which I'm giving you now. I should have told you about it from the start. I'm sorry. We're all very tired here. I filed via the direct channel with Rafik's co-signature. Meanwhile, I had other problems. The GTA Border Security Section, which operated separately from the documentation office and had its own command structure, had apparently flagged Verith's case during a routine cross-check of new arrivals against the conflict zone database. This was standard practice, and it wasn't in itself a problem, except that the automated cross-check had generated an inquiry notice, which required Verith to appear at the border security desk for a clarification interview. The notice had been sent to her queue number in the GTA system, Since she didn't know how to access that queue, she hadn't received it. Since she hadn't responded within the required 12-hour window, the inquiry notice had been escalated to a compliance flag. A compliance flag meant her case was now technically in a suspended state pending resolution of the flag. I found this out when I went to check her queue status and saw the flag on the system. I went directly to the GTA border security section on level 1. The officer at the desk was a Velhari, which was actually a mild relief. Velhari border officers tended to be more reasonable than the Surik ones, in my experience, because they had less institutional investment in being difficult. Though I recognize that's a generalization and I'm not entirely proud of it. The inquiry notice was sent to a claimant who had not been informed of how to access the queue system, I said, putting my core ID and Verith's case number on the desk. She didn't receive it. The compliance flag is a result of a notification failure on the GTA's side, not non-compliance on the claimant's side. I'd like to request that the flag be cleared and the interview be rescheduled as a standard appointment. The officer looked at the case number, looked at his screen, looked at me. The compliance flag is automated, he said. I don't have the clearance to clear an automated flag. You need to submit a flag review request. Through the documentation office, I said. That's right. With a 10 to 14 cycle processing time. I don't set the processing times. I looked at him for a moment. Then I said, who does have the clearance to clear an automated compliance flag at this station? A pause. Section Commander Oryath, he said. But Section Commander Oryath is not available for individual case consultations, I said. I know, I'd like to request a formal appointment. Appointments with Section Commander Oryath are. I know they're scheduled through the administrative office. I'll go there now. I picked up my core ID from the desk. Thank you for your time. I have found over 11 months that thanking people for their time when they've been obstinate is one of the more effective tools available to me, for reasons I cannot entirely explain. I did not get an appointment with Section Commander Oryath that day. I got an appointment for 3 days later. In the meantime, the compliance flag sat on Verith's case, and her standard queue position, which had been sitting at roughly day 9 of the estimated 12:15, was now frozen. She was not moving through the process while the flag was active. I explained all of this to Verith that evening, sitting in Section 7C with SAE asleep between us and the corridor quiet around us. I explained it honestly, because she deserved honesty, and because I've found that telling people the truth about where things are is almost always better than protective vagueness. Protective vagueness makes people feel managed, and no one in a dire situation wants to feel managed. They want to feel that someone is actually fighting for them, including being honest when the fight is hard. She listened to the full explanation. Then she said, the compliance flag, it is on the record. Yes. And if it stays there, I'm going to get it removed, I said. That's my job right now. I have an appointment with the section commander in 3 days, and the direct channel on the priority review should respond within 4 to 5 cycles. They have a faster turnaround than the standard queue. 3 days. I know, I said. I'm sorry, I'm moving as fast as I can. She was quiet for a moment. SAE stirred slightly in her sleep, and Verith automatically put a hand on her back, a small, practiced gesture, the kind of thing you do 10,000 times until you stop noticing you do it. I believe you, she said. I said you came back when you said you would. I said that meant something. I am not withdrawing that. Okay, I said, good. I am just, she stopped, started again. SAE had a night terror last night. She does not remember them. She sleeps again, and in the morning she does not know it happened. But I hear her, and I cannot help her through it. I can hold her, but I cannot make the nights shorter. I sat with that for a moment. Do you want me to see if Thur can give her something for sleep? I asked. Not sedation, just something that helps the sleep be more stable. She has something that's cleared for most biology types. Is it safe for her? Thur would check it against her scan before giving it. But yes, the compound is specifically formulated to be safe. Verith considered this. Yes, she said. Thank you. I was quiet for a moment, and then I said something that I hadn't planned to say. I said it because the corridor was quiet, and the light was low, and SAE was asleep with her small face tilted toward her sister, and I had been in that corridor for 11 months, and sometimes things come out that you've been keeping in the professional container. She's going to be okay, I said. SAE, she's going to be okay, and so are you. Verith looked at me, the amber eyes, the folded back ears beginning to unfold slightly, which I had by then learned was the inverse of the stress indicator. Unfolding was relaxation, or at least the beginning of it. You do not know that, she said, but she said it without heat, just observation. No, I said, I don't know it. But I'm going to work on it like I do. Part 4, the appointment with ORITH. GTA Border Section Commander Oryth was a Surik, senior rank, 23 years in the GTA Border Administration. A Surik officer of that seniority had a set of specific characteristics that I had by then learned to work with. Formal, procedurally rigid, not unkind exactly, but operating from a framework where kindness was not a relevant variable. Everything went through the code. Everything was evaluated against the code. The code was the beginning and end of it, which was both the obstacle and the opening. Because the code, properly read, actually contained provisions that worked in Verith and C's favor. The Surin campaign displacement provisions I'd referenced in the priority review package weren't just background context. They were specific code amendments with specific force. They'd been negotiated by the Species Council after the Surin campaign, specifically to prevent situations like Verith's from falling through the standard processing cracks. Oryth was rigid about the code. But if the code said something, Oryth would do it. That was, in a strange way, useful. I had prepared thoroughly. I had the case file. I had the Surin provisions text highlighted with the relevant sections cross-referenced to Verith's documented situation. I had Thur's medical report. I had the displacement provisions implementation guidelines that had been issued by the GTA Legal Division, which were not widely circulated, but were part of the public record. I had also done something that I want to note here because I'm proud of it, and because it matters in the record. I had contacted Earth's GTA Council Representative's office. Earth has a representative on the GTA Council, Representative Asha Ndiaye, a former diplomat who had been in that role for 8 years and was, by all accounts, a formidable person. I didn't have access to Representative Ndiaye directly, but our Corps had a liaison contact in her office, a junior staffer named Wen, and I had spent time the previous evening writing when a very detailed, very specific message explaining the situation and requesting that the representative's office log a formal inquiry into the processing of the case. A formal inquiry from a council representative's office doesn't automatically fix anything, but it puts the case on a different level of visibility. Bureaucracies respond to visibility. When something is invisible, one case in a 400-person holding corridor, it stays in the queue indefinitely. When something is visible, when it's the subject of a representative's formal inquiry, people who have been too busy to look at it suddenly have time. I had asked Wen to file the inquiry. Wen had confirmed that morning that it was filed. I did not tell Oryth this at the beginning of our meeting. I presented the case on its merits, Verith's documented circumstances, the third belt situation, the medical flags, the displacement provisions applicability. Oryth listened in the way that a Surik senior officer listens, still, attentive, without expression. He interrupted once to ask for clarification on the timeline of the rib injury relative to the departure date. He asked for the documentation provenance on one of the third belt conflict reports. I had both ready. Then I addressed the compliance flag directly. The flag resulted from an inquiry notice that wasn't received because the claimant was not informed of how to access the GTA queue system at intake, I said. The notification failure is documented. I've pulled the intake log, which shows that the standard orientation information about queue access was not provided at the time of intake. This is an administrative gap on the GTA's side, not a claimant failure. Under Code Section 14, Article 3, which I have here, I place the text on the desk. A compliance flag must be reviewed and cleared if the documented basis for noncompliance is a GTA administrative failure rather than a claimant action. Oryth looked at the text. He was quiet for a moment. You've prepared thoroughly, he said. I try to. Another pause. The inquiry notice failure was the intake officer's oversight, he said. That is documentable. I have the intake log here as well. He looked at the documents. Then he looked at me. I can clear the compliance flag on the basis of the administrative failure documentation, he said. That is within my authority. The flag review process exists precisely for this scenario. Thank you, I said. The priority review, he started. There's also, I said carefully, a formal inquiry from the council representative's office registered on this case as of this morning. Oryth went very still for a moment, the specific stillness of a Zurich officer calculating political weight. Asha Indioi's office, I said, filed yesterday. I have the reference number. He looked at me for a long moment. The priority review, he said, can be expedited under Surin campaign displacement provisions if the section commander's office endorses it, which requires a section commander's signature on the expedite request. He pulled up a form on his desk terminal. Walk me through the specific displacement provision citations, he said. I want to make sure the file is complete. I walked him through every citation. It took 40 minutes. He signed.